All right, so we are continuing this series called Dangerous Prayers. And as I mentioned last week, this isn't dangerous like something odd, but like dangerous in a good way. It's dangerous in a good way because these are things that we need to do before God, but yet most of the time we don't. Last week we talked about searching us, right? We asked God to search us. We said, search us and know our hearts. This came from Psalm 139, and it was from that psalm that if we prayed this, we're asking God to be able to point out the things in us that are not good, that are not healthy, and that we can then grow from, that He can lead us on this path of everlasting life. So today we're going to, this prayer for today is not an easy one. I mean, it's called dangerous prayer for a reason, but what this one does, and I think that there's going to be some people today who's going to say, I don't want to pray that. You're going to walk away and you're going to say, I don't know if I actually want to speak those words to God, because if I am not careful, the things that I ask for, God's going to give me. And today we're asking God to break us. So here's the thing, so Mother's Day, I talked about mourning and death. Father's Day, I'm talking about one of the hardest parts of this, about breaking us. I'm like, I don't know what it is, that somehow I'm aligning like really hard messages for like Mother's Day and Father's Day. I don't know what happened, but somehow God ordained it. So here we are, we're going to get into this, and we're going to ask God today to break us. Break me, God, break me. You see, there's a part in our life and in our journey with God, and everybody has a different journey. Everybody has a different course of faith. Sometimes there's hills and there's valleys and there's ways in which we go that are different from other people. But there is something that happens if we want to get to a place where we're saying we want to be closer to God. We're going to have to say, God, break me. But we're like, but that's hard. It's hard to get to a place to be able to say, God, I want you to break me of the things that I'm doing, breaking me, the thoughts that I have, the ways that I want to go, the things that I want to do, all my plans. God, break it, and then set me on a path, your path. You see, that's a hard prayer to pray. Today, we're going to... Hey, Ty, there you go. There we go. Let me just start off with my story here for a moment, because it's never good for me to be able to tell you to apply the prayer, and especially a difficult prayer, one that I haven't understood myself. When I came to Chicago, it was like 7 years ago. And when I came to Chicago, I was very confident. I had lots of confidence in myself. I had lots of confidence in what I could do. I had lots of confidence in the things that I think God was going to accomplish through me. And here's the thing, God was like, hey, just wait. You see, there's parts that I wish I knew then, what I knew today, is that God was going to break me in order to be able to find something from that. The first 2 weeks I was in Chicago, I was not at this church, Tabor. God bless Tabor. I was at a different church. Within the first 2 weeks, somebody called me a cult leader. Somebody told me I was leading people in the wrong direction. They told me that I should go and spend time in dangerous neighborhoods at night so that I could possibly be murdered. Now you're saying, no way, this is not, that did not, no, this happened, because I'm telling you, it happened. It was real conversations that you'd think, these were from Christians. I'm like, well, I think so. But I'm just telling you, like, these are all within the first couple of weeks. And I'm looking at this and I'm saying, God, what are you doing? And you see, that wasn't even the end of it. It was like constant, taking almost like a 2x4 and like just pounding. And I'm like, all right, I can take this, I can take it. I'm strong. I got a nice, healthy mental attitude. But the problem is that when you're beaten enough, sometimes you're just like, I want to stay down. I don't want to get up. I remember a church planning mentor of mine prior to coming to Chicago, he was saying and I was talking to him about the situation that I was going to head into, and he says, it's going to be the hardest thing that you will ever do. And I'm like, nah, it can't be that hard. Can't be that difficult. It won't be that trying. And yet it's almost like what he was telling me was that God was going to continually break me down until I was ready to stand up, not in my own strength and not in my own confidence, but in God's. There's a certain part about understanding brokenness and God breaking you down that you're like, I don't know what it's going to look like. You're thinking ahead and you're saying, what does it actually feel like to be broken, to be beaten down, to be at that place where you're saying, I have nothing else? And this is all I can tell you. You'll know it when you feel it. To be at a place where God breaks you, to be at a place where God breaks your confidence, to be able to break your everything around you, and then he's like, all right, are you done yet? Are you ready? Because God doesn't leave us broken. God doesn't leave us beaten. God doesn't leave us in the gutter. And today we're going to look at two stories back to back in the Gospel of Mark. And so you heard a moment before, Laura just read the passage from Mark chapter 14. And here's the passage. There's a prostitute. So it's a woman whose job it is to sleep with men to be able to gain income. This woman and all of the prostitutes at the time in the first century were all filled with shame, with guilt. Why? Because women hated them, because they were sleeping with their husbands, their brothers, their fathers, and men used them. They didn't look at them and say, oh, I'm really glad to be with you. They used them again and again and again. So when you're seeing a woman come to Jesus, you can tell that she's already broke. Let's go to Mark chapter 4, verse 14, verse 3. If you got your Bibles, feel free, open it up. Meanwhile, Jesus was in Bethany at the home of Simon, a man who had previously had leprosy. While he was eating, a woman came in with a beautiful alabaster jar of expensive perfume made from the essence of nard. She broke open the jar, poured the perfume over Jesus' head. Right? So here's a woman, right? She is not invited to this dinner party. She wasn't invited. There was no invite that came across, her as her business is going out daily. She didn't get an invitation to this dinner. But when she saw Jesus, she went in, uninvited. This woman took this jar of expensive perfume, poured it over Jesus' head. Many people were probably looking at her, and we'll get to their reaction here in a second. But what we're seeing here is that she broke the jar. The jar was broken, and all of the perfume was on Jesus. What Jesus saw in her was different than anyone else who was looking at this woman in her daily going about. Jesus looked at her with respect, with honor, with dignity. She had never been looked at that way. You see, this woman didn't start off in her life and wondered, hey, at what point in time can I be a prostitute? I really want to be the number one prostitute in all of Jerusalem. She's not thinking that. No one does. She came to this spot in her life when this was the only thing that she could ever picture herself doing because she was limited in what she could do. Everyone else looked at her with shame, with hatred. And yet Jesus saw her differently. Jesus loved her. You see, this perfume, as it says there in other translations, was probably worth about a year's wages. Now, if you're thinking about that, that's pretty expensive perfume, right? Just think about somebody with just an average job making a year's wages. Some people put this at around like $20,000 to $25,000 worth of perfume. I mean, that's like, of course, they didn't deal with dollars, but if you're trying to be able to put it into an American context, it's about $20,000 to $25,000 worth of perfume. Has anybody ever bought a $20,000 bottle of perfume before, just in case? I mean, all right, just making sure. I didn't think so. But if you can imagine then, she's saying this is worth a lot to her. This was her livelihood. This was her job. And she was saying, I'm breaking it and I'm pouring it over Jesus' head. What was the reaction? Verse 4. Some of those that were at the table were indignant. That same word, indignant, angry, mad. They were outraged. Why waste such expensive perfume? It could have been sold for a year's wages and the money given to the poor. And what did they do? They scolded her harshly. They didn't just think to themselves, this woman is a disgrace. They didn't just sit and stew in their anger. They actually lashed out at this woman. You wasted this. We could have gone in together. Like, I would have taken some of that perfume and gone and sold it. And we could have gone and, fed a whole bunch of poor people. We could have fed the hungry. We could have fed, all kinds of ways in which these people probably making it up in their own heads because they actually wouldn't do that in the first place. But they scolded her. They criticized her. They looked down on her. But when you see the thing that she gave to Jesus, it was everything that she was. Perfume, and especially this expensive perfume, would have been exactly what she would have needed to do her job. Perfume was not used by the ordinary woman in the village. Perfume was used most of the time by prostitutes because it was an invitation. As they would then stroll through the village, through the towns, they would have that wafting smell, and men would say, "Ooh, there's an invitation. That's my invitation to go and to take her." You see, when she took this perfume and she didn't just pour it, she broke the jar. She said, "I'm not filling this jar up anymore. Jesus, take my life. Take everything that I am. It's yours." This is break. This is God breaking her. Because in her heart, she's not saying, "I'm going back. I'm going to make sure that this is going to happen. So like, I'm just going to do this and show this a little bit of devotion over here so that God might be happy with." No, she's saying, "I don't want this anymore." And she broke the jar. She said, "Here's the perfume. I don't want it anymore. It should go to something more lovely than me." She gave it to Jesus. So this is what her gift represented, her past. She was saying, "This is what I was. This is what I did." And she's saying, "I'm going to break it." Why? Because she's saying, "I want to be able to leave this life of sin. I want to be able to leave this behind me. This was the only thing that I thought was me. This is the only way that I could find an income." But it's also left her with shame and with guilt. By breaking it, she's saying, "I'm going to leave this here." But it also represents her future, because this was her source of income. This was her provision. And what is she saying to God now? "God, I know that you're going to take care of me. I'm not going to rely on my own self and the things that I think that I have to do to be able to be loved and to be accepted by someone." She's saying, "God, you are going to now be my source." You see, and that's the part when you are broken down. You're like, "I've got nothing left. This is who I am." And we go to our second story, Mark chapter 14. You'll recognize this part of the passage because this is what's called the Maundy Thursday, the Jesus and the Last Supper, which if you look right above the altar right there, that's like a little picture of the Last Supper in wood, right? All hand carved right there. But what we're seeing here is like this leads into the Last Supper discussion. Now we look at verse 22. "And he took a cup of wine and he gave thanks to God for it. He gave it to them and he drank from it, and he says, 'This is my blood which confirms the covenant between God and his people. It's poured out as a sacrifice for many. I tell you the truth. I will not drink wine again until the day I drink it anew in the kingdom of God.'" And so what do we find here? Jesus, on this Last Supper, he takes bread, and what does he do with the bread? What does he say he does? Go ahead, say it out loud if you know it. He breaks it. What does he do with the wine? He pours it out. You see, this is the same part when you're looking back at this whole thing with the woman and the alabaster jar of expensive perfume. This is exactly what she does. She breaks the jar and pours the perfume over his head. Jesus is broken and poured out You see in this part, in this passage, you see that Jesus is already giving this understanding of this is what I'm going to do for you. This is my body. This is my blood, broken and poured out for you. Let me just give you a companion verse here for a second. Luke chapter 22, verse 19. You don't have to jump over there unless you are quick, but this is what it says about the bread. Verse 19, he took some bread and gave thanks for it, and then he broke it into pieces and gave it to his disciples. This is my body, which is given for you. Do this in remembrance of me. Jesus was broken. Jesus broke his body, poured out his blood, not just for himself, right? It wasn't for his good, but he says it this way, it's for you, for me. Jesus did this for us. And so when we look at what this means, as we try to be able to live a life of brokenness to God's purpose, what does that mean? It means that there's God's purpose, and then there's oftentimes what we would call our purpose. So we try to be able to define our purpose, and God's like, all right, you can try to go that route. You can try to continue down your path of what you think your purpose is, and I'm going to help you to try to be able to define what my purpose is for you. Oftentimes, those two do not align. Because, as we talked about last week, our hearts are often deceitful. And if we're trying to be able to make decisions and things that we believe without understanding what God's purpose is for us, then the two, of course, are not going to align. Luther put it this way. He says, every single day we should be broken before God. So it's not just a moment like, hey, if I ask God to break me once, is that going to be sufficient? No, because here's the thing, like we're still human. It's the reason why Luther, when he talked about it, he says every single morning he would get up and remind himself that this is who I am and I'm going to be a broken person, and so I'm going to come before God every day and to ask for forgiveness and seek God's direction and try to understand what God's will is, what God's purpose is for our life. I don't know if you've noticed, but the people who have been broken in life, there's a lot of things that they just like, hey, I don't care what you think about me anymore. Why? Because people have already seen them as less than. This prostitute, this woman here, when people had already both scorned her, hated her, yelled at her, probably thrown stuff at her. She didn't care what people thought anymore when she was going to walk into a dinner party uninvited. She was broken. And you see, God is doing the same. He's reaching out to people, not the ones who are like standing all boastful, like, oh, like I deserve God's love. Oh, no, like I'm better than you. Like God's like, okay, but God, who's God reaching out to? It's the people on the fringes, the people who are already saying, I'm broken, God, help me. And God is there to be able to speak into that brokenness. And try to be able to lift people up. A lot of times what we try to do as people is we present ourselves with all of our strength and all of our confidence. We try to go to people and people are like, oh, I'm really impressed that you're strong, you're able to do this and you're able to do that. And you're like, oh yeah, I like when people are looking at me and I love all of that confidence from my strength. But here's the part about it that maybe this is a part of the secret to be able to live in a life broken to God, is that we connect with people most through our brokenness. It's not in our strength that we boast. It's not in the ways in which we are so confident in ourselves and confident in everything. Like, no, there's the parts when we connect with people, it's always through our brokenness. Because they recognize brokenness in themselves. Dr. Henry Cloud. Anybody know Dr. Henry Cloud? He's a psychologist, he's a philosopher, he's a deep thinker. He's got lots of good things to be able to say. He talked about tears. And he said, have you ever noticed why tears come from our eyes? They could have come from anywhere else, right? You imagine tears from your nose would have just blended in nicely, right? You could have gone away, like people would have not even recognized you, just like, stuffy nose, like that's it. Nobody would have recognized it. Nobody would have seen it. He puts together this whole story and understanding about tears from our eyes. And the reason why we have tear ducts is because we're often looking at somebody else when we're crying. Somebody gets to see us. That sometimes those tears might represent joy, but they also might represent sadness and hurt. You see, the parts when we are weak, when we are broken, people are like, I see it, I identify with it. And those are the parts we get to connect with others in. The most effective ministry, your most effective ministry, you carrying out the purpose and the will of God in your life will always come out of your deepest hurts. The ways that people have hurt you, you're going to be able to talk to others and be able to see that deep hurt even in them, and you're going to say, you know what? This is what God does. He doesn't leave us in brokenness. This is what God has done for me. He's taken my hurt. He's taken all those hurts and the things that people have put on me, and He's shown me respect, honor, and the deepest amount of love. When you start carrying these things out in your own life, you'll start to be able to see people connecting with that brokenness, connecting with the places that you've been. This is all part of how we talk about God working things for the good of those who love Him. When we see these hurts, God is not going to waste it. It doesn't mean that God hurt you in order to be able to make that happen. That's not true. Don't listen to those lies. But God's going to take those hurts. God's going to take that brokenness, and He's going to be able to put a purpose to it. This is why Jesus has an invitation for His disciples, for His followers, when He says, come and die. And we're like, whoa, Jesus, you just crossed a line. Come and die? I don't want to die. I want to live. Jesus calls each of us. He says, come, take up your cross. Die to self, because that's where you're going to find life. We trust Jesus at his words when he says he's broken and poured out for us. We trust Jesus at his words when he says, come and die so that you can find life. This is the good news for us today, even in this message of breaking us, right? Praying this prayer of, God, please break me, because we want to see the glory of God shown in our life. We see two examples today. The prostitute who broke the entire jar. She could have poured out a little bit and still honored Jesus. She could have taken a little bit of her life and said, Jesus, I'm going to give this to you. But she understood this call to come and die. She says, here's my life, take it. It's yours. Jesus, when we see the same thing, when he goes into this night that he was betrayed, this Last Supper, when he's saying, here's my body and here's my blood, broken and poured out for you. Jesus didn't say, here's a little bit of my body, because I got to keep some for myself. Here's a little bit of my blood so that you can understand and know and taste and see that God is good. But Jesus also didn't hold anything back. When he went to the cross, he died for you, for me. It wasn't a mock death. It was an actual death. He stopped breathing. His spirit left him. You see, there's the part that Jesus doesn't hold back. He gives his entire life for us. So what are you trying to hold back? Have you tried to be able to walk in the confidence of your path? Have you tried to be able to walk in this way in which you're like, no, I think I have every part of life scheduled out. I have every path that I believe is going to come my way. I have it all mapped out. I know exactly what it is. I know exactly what I'm doing. And you have all the confidence in yourself. Maybe you do. And maybe this is the reason why you're holding back, because you're also saying, hey, I've been successful thus far. I've done pretty well for myself. What are we holding back? We're saying, Jesus, I don't want to give all of it. I just want to give a piece, a slice. Isn't that good enough? When we hear Jesus' words when he says, come and die so that you can find life. It's not a call for a slice. It's a call for the whole. So are you holding back? Are you ready to be able to pray a prayer that says, God, please break me so that I can find life in you? God, please break my will so that my will be aligned with yours. Are you ready to pray this prayer? It's dangerous, but it's good. In Jesus' name, amen.